Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome to my Tiny Talks podcast, the show where we'll dive into self-love, inner child healing, and discovering your soul's purpose. I look forward to chatting with you every single Sunday and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's Tiny Talk. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of Tiny Talks. If you guys are listening to this on the day of airing, today is Mother's Day, so a huge happy Mother's Day to all you moms out there, all you animal moms too. I see you as well. You guys are all doing such good work, and I am just such a love and fan of moms. I've just witnessed my own mom and my grandma and my soon-to-be, sister-in-law and just different women in my life recently becoming moms, and it is just so beautiful to witness. But I've also witnessed the other side of motherhood, which is kind of some of the stress that can come with that, obviously, with bringing a new human being into the world and just all the work and dedication and love that it takes to be a mom. So for all you moms out there, you guys are rock stars. I love you all. You're doing such a fabulous job. And I hope that you can find some room and capacity today to do something for yourself if you're not already being spoiled by all those around you that love you very, very much. So happy Sunday, happy Mother's Day. And today officially marks 30 episodes of Tiny Talks. That is crazy that we are at 30 episodes and I am just getting started. I am super pumped to dive into today's content with you guys, but also just reminding myself to pause and reflect on how far we've come, where we have yet to go, and just how exciting this milestone is of hitting 30 episodes. So just overall a super exciting day, and I am pumped to be here with you guys. So if you guys tuned into last week's episode of Tiny Talks, this week's episode is going to segue off of that. So last week I kind of began to dive into grounding techniques and ways to physically ground yourself. And for today, I am going to be giving you guys some actual tangible techniques that you can do, as well as diving into a little bit more about what grounding is and why it's so important and why we need to make sure that we're practicing grounding and mindfulness often. So when I was preparing for this week's episode, I was doing quite a bit of research, as I always do for my episodes, and just diving in and learning and reading and evolving, because as well as sharing this information with you guys, I also want to fill my own noggin and my own brain with different resources and things. And I've already kind of made the foundation for myself of what grounding and grounding techniques are based on being a social worker, having worked in the trauma recovery field and actively doing a lot of this work with clients, as well as myself going to therapy and gaining my own grounding techniques toolbox for myself. But when I was doing research for this episode and I kind of Googled, what is grounding? You would not believe the amount of things that came up that were not related to what I am going to be talking about today. However, there was one point that came on, and it said as an example of what grounding is it's when a plane is on the ground. And at first I was like, that doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm talking about. But as I kind of just sat with it for a moment, I'm like, it really is exactly what I'm talking about. When a plane is at its runway and it is parked and it is sitting there, it is grounded. When it is up in the air, it is not grounded. It is flying. And I like to think after reading that our minds are kind of the same way. We're either stopped at our terminal, which would be our physical body, and grounded there, paused there, or our mind can go up in the clouds sometimes, which is often referred to as dissociation. So basically when your mind likes to pull away. And so when I read that definition at first, I was like, that doesn't really fit what I'm talking about. But it really does, you guys. We really are like these planes that go from terminal to up in the air, to back to a terminal, to back up in the air. And although that's a plane's job to do that, that isn't necessarily our mind's job to do that, to be up and down so frequently and so often and going away from its ground homeostasis state so often. And so I decided I was going to come up with my own ways to kind of define or explain what grounding is. And so the first kind of snap that I came up with was being present in your body. So what is grounding? It's being present in your body. It's bringing awareness back to your body. It's getting that mind-body conversation happening again. because we often don't realize that our body is one being. And I learned this a lot when I was in school for social work, is that we often like to look at our body as different chunks. You know, our foot, and then we have our leg, and then we have our stomach, and then our shoulders, and then our hands and our head. But at the end of the day, our body is one being, and everything from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet is always communicating. Always, always, always. That conversation is always going. But so when our body feels like it's here, but our mind seems like it's somewhere else, or vice versa, that can really be detrimental to our body and to our health, because our mind isn't having that same conversation. Think of it again like that plane. Imagine if the plane and the people that are controlling it, so the flight people, like air traffic controllers, imagine if an air traffic controller couldn't communicate with a pilot, that flight wouldn't go so well. It's the same with our body. If our mind and our body isn't able to have that conversation of if something is safe, is it okay to take off? Is it okay to fly in this zone? Bringing that back to our own body, is it safe to be around this person? Is it safe to be in this room? Etc., etc. If that conversation has been blocked or interrupted, that can cause a panic and a flight response or a flee response or a stress response. The same as if a plane couldn't contact an air traffic controller when they're up in the air, that would be cause for being overwhelmed and for being nervous, scared of what's going to happen, right? And our body is no different. So my definition is basically coming back to the present moment. The physical act of grounding is plugging those cords back in and being back in your body. So even right now, before we dive further, pause. How are you? How is your body? How is your mind? What would you rate yourself right now on a scale of 1 to 10? Check-ins are a great way that we can begin to get that mind-body connection back online. Because oftentimes we just go through the flow of things and we're on autopilot from one thing to the next, no pun intended on the autopilot, and we forget to have that conversation, right? And so it's so important that we're intentional about coming back to our bodies, which is, again, exactly what I'm going to share with you guys today, is some tactical techniques that you can use on a day-to-day basis. Again, I'm going to note proactively. It's so important that we do these things proactively, but I'm going to dive into that a little bit more later. But so you might all be wondering, that's great. This is great. But why is it important? Why should I give a crap if I'm grounded? Why does it matter if I'm in my body? And the thing about this is that most people aren't. If I'm going to be blatantly honest, even when I go to the mall, when I go to the grocery store, when I'm driving, I can just see so many disconnected people. I feel like I'm definitely not an expert, but I feel like after having worked with lots of clients, I can typically tell to some degree when someone is feeling disconnected. I can see it in their face. I can hear it in their tone of voice. I can see it in their body. And I think that a lot of us are walking around in that state of not being grounded. And so that would be in our state of stress response and survival response. And a lot of us think that, we have to go through something traumatic or something horrendous for our stress response to be triggered or to act out of that state. But I just want to remind everybody of the last 2 years of the pandemic that we've gone through. It's so important that we check in with ourselves of how we've adapted through that time. Because the thing with COVID and there being a virus is that we can't physically see a virus, meaning that anything and everyone around us is potentially a threat. That could potentially hurt us. Oh, they could potentially hurt us. It's everywhere, right? Our body is just naturally acting out of that state because that's what we've been trained and ingrained in us to do for the last 2 years. And I think that a lot of us, and it's normal, it's okay. That's what I want to say is I just want to validate that if that is you, that is okay. And the reason that I say that it's okay, and I always bring this point up because one time I had a client come back to me and say, it's not okay that this is happening. But I always want to shed light on that. No, it might not be quote unquote okay, but if we can find the space and the capacity to forgive ourselves that our body and our mind are doing everything that they know how to do to keep us safe. And the more that we can just remember that and realize that every time that our body does go into that dissociative state, every time that we do go into a stress response, we don't have the physical control of that, meaning our body just does it on its own to protect us. And so when I say it's okay, I mean it's okay because that's our body and mind's way of protecting us, because our body and mind want one thing. And that one thing is in common, and that is to keep you alive, to keep your heart beating, and to keep you safe. And so the reason that I say that is because I think a lot of us are walking around and living our lives in that autopilot state. We have so much on our plates and we do so much of everything except for those things that make us feel at peace. And when we feel at peace, we often feel grounded. And so that is why it is so important. And again, it's also important because it allows our body to relax. And when our body is relaxed and our thinking brain comes back online, we're able to make clear, better, rational decisions about things. We're not just acting out of a state of impulse or anger or why did I say that? Why did I do that? Right? We often do that when we get into those states of just like, we don't know what to do with ourselves. That's because our body isn't grounded. We are triggered. We are uplifted in some way. So it's about coming back to our bodies. So that is why it's so important that we ground ourselves. And again, this doesn't just have to be if you've gone through something traumatic. We all are human beings. We all can drift away from our mind and body. So we all need to be proactive in our grounding techniques and starting with where you're at and going from there. There is not one single person on the face of the earth who cannot benefit from grounding. Now, I will just say that depending on your past, as always, grounding can potentially be overwhelming. If your body wasn't always the safest place to be in, grounding could be overwhelming. So if that is you and you are operating at that state, or you have gone through something that has allowed your body and your mind to be having that conversation, I definitely encourage you to seek professional help. Because if we are alone and we are doing this and that is overwhelming, that could potentially be a trickle-down effect and could really be a negative thing. But you know your body best. You know how you feel when you come back to your body. But again, with that, it is about challenging ourselves to a certain extent. Because the more that we run away from our body and we keep telling ourselves that conversation that our brain and our body isn't safe, it's almost like we're at war with ourselves. And I know we all know what it's like to be at war with ourselves or competition with ourselves. It's icky and it's a hard thing to be with because we are who we are. And if we're just at a constant fight with ourselves, that can also be really, really exhausting. But that is all I will really say about that. I really want to dive into more actual ways to ground yourself. So, when do we typically become ungrounded? And by that, I mean, when do we typically start to be in that dissociative state? And again, just to kind of define dissociation, because I think I say that word a lot, I want you to think of a time, this is my best example that I can give because I think everyone has at least one memory of this, but let's say one time you're driving to the store, or you're driving to work, or driving to a friend's house, and you feel like you just ended up there. And you're like, whoa, I don't really remember the drive here. I don't really remember the traffic lights or traffic or anything. I don't really know how I got here. That is dissociation. That would be a mild case of it in the fact that you knew where you were going, but that is an example of what dissociation can look like. It's basically gaps in our memory that can happen because, again, our brain is pulling the ripcord because things are becoming too much or too overwhelming. And you could see just on that example of driving and not really knowing how you got there, how being in a dissociative state can really be dangerous. The same as going to work super stressed. If you are not in your body and making those rational decisions, that is typically how accidents and mistakes happen at work, is because people are just too stressed and overwhelmed. So that is kind of the first way that we can begin to feel ungrounded, or a common area where I see that is when we have too much going on at once. The second time it typically happens is when we just have too many emotions and thoughts going on at once. And so again, our brain wants to pull that ripcord and just go away and disappear for a little bit. And then the third way that we can typically become ungrounded is if we're in a situation that is not in alignment. And this is kind of what I was saying, is when we're often doing something that we love or we enjoy, or, we're just feeling excited and our values are aligned and people we love are around and all those things, we typically feel more grounded because it's safe to be there. It's when we're in those situations that aren't aligned that we typically start to go into that state of not being grounded. And so there's kind of 3 categories of grounding yourself. So the first one would be physical. So physically grounding yourself. And so grounding techniques that create calm within your body or relate to your physical well-being. So that would be physical things. And then the second would be mental, right? So your mindset shift, mindfulness. This is basically ways to reframe your thinking and to help avoid overwhelming your nervous system. So that would be a lot of our mindfulness practices. And then the third category of grounding yourself would be emotional self-care. It'd be emotionally looking after yourself. So right now I'm going to dive into some physical techniques, and those all fall under one of those categories of being physical, mental, or emotional. And so the first technique that I'm going to share with you guys is something that you're already doing and have been doing for the whole duration of this podcast, without even knowing that you're doing it, because your body just does it on its own. And that is breathing. Breathing and breath work is, if I could say that it's the most important thing in life, I probably would. Because our breath holds so much of the way that we live our life. And that is kind of what I found personally through yoga. I used to get so blocked in certain poses, and I felt like my body was just at its max, and I would take mindful, deep breaths, and I would notice my body start to settle in a little more, and I could go deeper in a pose. And that's the same thing just living day to day. Because oftentimes we're all walking around doing that shallow breathing, right? Right? And we don't even realize that we're doing it. And so bringing awareness to your breath as often as possible is so important. Maybe that's scheduling in a meeting, and beside the name of that meeting, you put, how is my breathing? Maybe you have sticky notes. I have sticky notes all around my office space with different reminders. And one of them says, are you holding your breath? Because what we do when we get stressed is, if we're not doing that shallow breathing, we hold our breath. I know that I'm guilty of doing this if I'm getting a needle, or if I'm going to get any kind of procedure done, or if I'm at the hospital or a doctor or anything like that. I'll hold my breath. It's basically like my body's response of when I'm in a state of overwhelm is to hold my breath. And I think that all of us do that, right? Something scares us. What do? Takes our breath away, right? Our breath holds so much of our stress, because when we're doing that shallow breathing, basically what happens is, it's the same as when you're working out. When you're working out and you're breathing hard, what happens? Your heart speeds up. Right? Your blood flow increases, your energy spikes, right? All those things start to speed up. And what happens when we're in a fight response? Our heart speeds up, our blood starts pumping faster, right? It's the same response. But the difference is that when we're shallow breathing and there's not a threat, we are producing cortisol, and cortisol is our stress response. And so when we're acting out of that state of speeding up our heart, our body is in overdrive. It's working so much harder than it has to. And of course, when that's happening and we trigger that fight response, there's no way that we can be grounded. Because if we were, we wouldn't be operating out of that state. And so I wanted to spend a decent amount of time talking about breathing and breath work, because in the beginning, I thought it was so woo-woo to talk about breathing. I thought, like, yeah, we all breathe. What's the big deal? But the more that I've personally witnessed how much I hold my breath and shallow breathe, and how much that triggers anger for me, especially, I noticed this yesterday. I was walking around Costco and it was a zoo. There was so many people, which, I mean, my mistake, Mother's Day weekend, it was a Saturday, it was beautiful out. Of course it was going to be busy. But I noticed myself taking really shallow breaths, because I do get anxious around a lot of people. And I was walking down one aisle and there wasn't many people, and I brought awareness to my breath, and I was able to just take a deeper breath, focus on what I needed to do to finish and to leave the store. But oftentimes what I would do is I would keep that breathing, and I would be walking around and I'd be flustered and I would forget stuff. And again, that's not safe to be operating out of that state. And so a huge exercise that is super helpful for breathing is something that you may have heard of before, and it's called box breathing, where basically you take a deep breath in, you hold it for 4, or you inhale for 4, you hold it for 4, you exhale for 4, you hold it for 4. And I personally like to close my eyes and picture like a box being formed. So 4, 4, 4, 4. And I'll usually do that 2 or 3 times, and I'll instantly just notice myself calming down. And even if you were to do that 4 times, that's not going to take you very long. That's going to take you less than a minute to do and to come back to our body. And imagine if we all just pause for just 1 minute through different parts of our day, even at a red light. A red light is a great indicator and physical sign to slow down, because obviously your car needs to physically stop, but how are you doing in that vehicle? Maybe next time you see a red light, that will correlate to check in with your breathing. I'm going to instill that in your brain right now. All right, so the next technique that I have for you guys is more tactical one. So basically incorporating your hands. And so using your hands is a great way of getting that mind-body connection back online, because by doing a mindfulness practice and incorporating your hands, you're using, again, that brain-body connection. They have to talk to each other. So a couple great things to do for this is knitting, gardening, painting, petting an animal, petting your dog, petting your cat, doing the dishes, right? Cleaning your space, doing a craft, whatever it is, doing things like that with your physical hands is really, really good at bringing different parts of your brain responsible for self-soothing and relaxation back online. And so another tactical example that you can do is to put your hands in cold water. And while you do this, I want you to be mindful, and I want you to focus on the temperature of the water. How does it feel on your pinky versus on your thumb? How does it feel on your middle finger versus your palm? How does the front of your hand feel versus the back of your hand? Right? Asking those questions and really getting intentional about bringing awareness to your hand. And then maybe switching it to warm water. How does your hand feel in warm water versus in cold water? Do you notice a difference? And you'll find that just by asking yourselves those questions and bringing your thoughts to something rather than your thoughts, your mind will start to calm down. And the next one is just to pick up or touch items around you and describe them out loud. So doing the same thing. Maybe you're sitting on your couch and you grab a throw pillow. Is it soft? Does it have a texture? What color is it? What size is it? Is it firm? Is it soft? Is it cold? Is it warm? How does the texture of that relate to the texture of your couch? Right? Feeling things. Everything that comes from grounding comes from our 5 senses. Our 5 senses are what brings us back to our body. Which brings me to my next one, which is to use scents. So this is why I love essential oils, why I do classes on essential oils and I educate on them, because essential oils, pure essential oils, which I will say I only buy and get and use essential oils from Young Living because that's the only company that I personally trust, but that's a whole other episode in and of itself. But I like to use essential oils to smell and to come back to my body. Now, the one thing that I will just note with our scent, and with any of our senses, but specifically our nose, is that when we smell something, it is directly correlated to a core memory. So think of a time you smell chocolate chip cookies and you think of baking at grandma's house, right? Or you think of popcorn, you think of the movie theater. Our mind starts to link things with our different senses. So if we have a smell of something that we know overwhelms us or triggers us or has been associated with a negative memory. So for example, I used to see this a lot with sexual assault survivors, is smells of cologne and perfume could really be overwhelming because potentially that's what a perpetrator was wearing at the time. And so knowing what scents overwhelm you is super important, and also finding ones that you know you enjoy. So maybe that's a new scent. And that's why Young Living's essential oils are so great, and that they have such a vast majority of blends and different oils that they've created that are designed specifically to support us with different things. So for example, one called Inner Child, one called Believe, one called Joy, one called Release, different things like that. So I like to smell them and bring awareness to what the smell of the oil is to kind of ingrain that in my mind. So the next time I smell it, I do feel joy, I do feel release, I do feel believe. right? So using essential oils and smelling something is a great way to come back to your body. The next one I have, which is one that is so easy to utilize no matter where you are, which is what I love about this one. And it's basically called the 5-4-3-2-1 method. It's super simple. So basically you're going to identify 5 things that you can hear, 4 things that you can see, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So you can see how this one really takes you through all of your senses. It allows you to get familiar with the environment in which you are in. And I will just say, I do this all the time in my own space. This same exercise, and I'll say different things every time. And it allows you to just bring that mind-body connection back online. Okay, I have 3 techniques left for you guys, and they're pretty quick. So the next one is music. Again, a sense. What do you hear? Listening to music that makes you feel happy, makes you feel light. Music is so amazing in that, yes, it sounds appealing and wonderful to our ears, but it is also a vibration and a frequency. And all music operates at a frequency. And we as humans are all frequency energetic beings. And when we can listen to music that literally raises our vibe, it is so good for our brain and our body. And if we're incorporating dance and flow into that, we're just benefiting ourselves even more by allowing that energy to flow through our body. The second to last technique that I have for you guys is one that I use pretty much every single day. And if you follow me on Instagram at JessieBrown13, you know that this is something that I do very often, and it's called butterfly tapping. So basically you're going to cross your arms in front of you. So placing your right hand on your left shoulder and your left hand on your right shoulder. And you're basically just going to go back and forth of tapping your hands, lifting one hand and tapping it down. And you can see how it kind of looks like a butterfly with your arms crossed. And so this does a lot of things. It helps to regulate our nervous system. It helps to cross the 2 sides of our brain together because we are reaching to opposite sides. The tapping is really good and self-soothing. Sometimes I like to rock myself back and forth the same as my mom used to do when I was little, right? It's that soothing technique. So those would be more of the emotional ones. And then the last technique that I have for you guys, which is something that I learned from my supervisor at my last, in clinical supervision at my last job, was something called the VOO technique. And so basically you're going to make a VOO noise with your mouth, which I'll do in a moment. And basically what this does is it helps to activate your vagus nerve. So your vagus nerve is that big nerve that runs down the back of your spine. And this is the the nerve that is the main nerve of your parasympathetic nervous system. So that rest and digest part of your nervous system. And so when we're able to activate that VOO and activate that vagus nerve, we're able to reset our nervous system. And some other things that trigger our vagus nerve is singing, it's humming, it's sucking on things. So as a baby, when we have a soother or we have our mom or we have a bottle, that sucking mechanism is very, very comforting to us because it helps trigger that vagus nerve. So sometimes eating like a hard candy or gum or stuff like that helps to calm us down. And so the VOO technique specifically involves taking a big deep breath in. So I'm going to do it with you guys right now. And then VOOing it out. It sounds like this. Ooh. And you would continue that for the whole exhale until you have no breath left. And I would encourage you to do this 2 to 3 times max and sit with how you feel. And I notice that every single time that I do it, my face relaxes. Like my cheeks just feel like they drop. My tongue falls down from the roof of my mouth. My eyes are relaxed. I just find my whole jaw unclenches. And it's just a really, really good, quick, easy technique that you can do if you're in the car, if you're in your house, wherever you are. If you're in an office, people might be wondering what sound you're making, but encourage them to come and do it with you. It's super good for us, all to be regulating our nervous systems. And so before I end today's episode and leaving you guys with those techniques, again, I just want to remind you that it's so important that we are proactive in our grounding, and it's so important that we do these things every single day, because the more that we do them every day, the more our mind remembers to do them. It's proactive. It's ingrained in us to do them. The same as we know to just go to the washroom when we wake up, to brush our teeth, to eat, to do those things. The more that we can incorporate exercises like this into our daily life, the less that we have to think about it because we just know to do it. And the more that we do it and the more rested our body gets, the less often we're going to notice ourselves dissociating, because we're going to just be able to remind ourselves and again, fill that backpack full of tools and resources. And I encourage you to begin to check in with yourself before you do the exercises and after. How did you feel before on a scale of 1 to 10? How are you feeling now? Even after this podcast episode, I checked in with you guys at the beginning. How are you feeling now as a checkout? Are you recognizing that maybe you've been acting out of that state of fight or flight? Are you recognizing that maybe you need to ground yourself a little more often? And again, it's okay. Find that love and compassion in your heart that you're willing to start right now. I want to thank you guys, as always, for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed today's content. If you know of anyone in your life that could benefit from learning more grounding techniques, hint, anybody, please feel free to send them this episode. Maybe share a nice message along with it. If you're wanting to connect, as always, you can find me on Instagram. I look forward to chatting with you all next week. Happy Mother's Day. Happy spring. We'll chat with you all soon. Bye, you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. I absolutely love connecting with you all, so make sure you're following me on Instagram. I am at JessieBrown13. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a review or share with someone you think would enjoy. I look forward to chatting with you all next week. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.